Alright, so, here's a little story time of what happened at work today. And, just before all this, I just want to apologise for my horrible Indian accent. Never been good at it, but it's not as funny if you don't have an impression of it. It's not as funny if it's not, some of the things happen isn't in the voice. Anyway, alright, so I'm working. Well, first off, I'm going to tell you a few stories before the big one that happened today, because got to pad that runtime. I don't even know why I don't earn revenue. But anyway, so what happens is first thing. My boss is trying to show me how he wants toasties to be made for the shop. So he's got like two pieces of bread set up. He's got like some chicken on them. And he's showing me how to do it. And so he's like, all right, you put the cheese on. And so I'm putting the cheese on. It's pre-sliced cheese. So I put the first slice on nice and square, and then the second one I put it like in a diamond shape, like the other way. And he's like, no, what are you doing? And I was like, what? I thought it'd be fancy. He's like, no, you're not the cook, you're not. And he's like, lost words. And so I was like, Gordon Ramsay? He's like, no, you're not Gordon Ramsay, you don't know how to swear. It's like, no, you can't be Gordon Ramsay. And I was like, alright. So that was number one funny. Second funny is he's standing at the register, and he's looking out over to the forecourt. And if you didn't know, I work at a service station, and the forecourt is where all the cars and the petrol pumps are. So he's standing there and he's looking out and he's just shaking his head. He's like, oh, people are so stupid. And then this kid comes in, like around my age, and he sort of looks kind of sheepish, and he's like, can I have the air thing? And so my boss hands him the air compressor part for the air hose, because we have like an air hose out back. Oh my gosh, this bird. We have we have like an air hose and stuff to pump up your tires, but it keeps getting nicked. So what we do is we take the compressor part, like the gauge, or not compressor, gauge, air gauge. We take the gauge part inside the shop, and so they've got to come in and grab it from us. So at least that way their face will be on camera if they try to nick it. And they've got to bring it back once they're done with it. And so this kid comes in, gets it, and goes back out. My manager's just staring, and he's like, oh no, people are so stupid. And I walk over, and he's like, look at this, and he points out, and there's the kid and like an older guy, and they're standing next to the air pump, and they've got like a big, the big construction equipment, like a CAT things, and they're pumping up the tires, and I'm like, what? And he looks at me and he's like, oh, so stupid. And he points to the guy who just came in. He's like, oh, he was trying to fill the tires with the gas. Because we've got petrol and gas, and the gas pump is right next to the air hose, and this guy tried to fill up the car tires with gas. It would have been a very explosive ride home. But yeah, anyway, so that was the precursors. That was just the little funny things. I always try to find joy in the small parts of my job, because otherwise I'd never get out of bed in the morning. But now here's the part you've all been waiting for, the one that's been advertised with such aplomb on the title. Alright. So now to the main course. So I'm at work, right? And I'm standing in front of the register. I'm just standing there, I'm waiting for customers to come in, all that. And we got a few people in the forecourt, a few people pulling into the servo, and so I'm sitting there, and I'm like, oh, I want to go home. I've got like an hour left on my shift, and there's nothing to do. Oh my gosh, hello mate. Yes, I can see you want to be in the video as well. Anyway, he's right above me, dude. Thank you, I appreciate the silence. Anyway, so. Oh my gosh. Anyway, so I'm sitting there, and seriously, you're having a field day. Oh my gosh, I'm calling you Frederica. Shut up, please. Thank you. Anyway, so I'm standing. Oh my gosh, Frederica. I'm standing there, and then I see this dude come in, and he looks like a piece of work. He's got like these thick, thick sunglasses that cover it, like you can't see his eyes. Big, dark, smoked glasses on his face, and he's got this it's like a big coat. It's sort of the colour of like dark green velvet, like that really rich colour, and it's like big and thick, and it goes down to like around his ankles, like really low down. And so I look at him, and he comes in, and he's like, "What?" And so I look at him, and he's like, "I want to speak to the general." And I'm just staring at him, and he's like, "I want to speak to the general." And I'm like, and he comes closer, like, "I want to speak to the general." And then my co-worker comes up, because I was working with my manager and a co-worker. And so he walks up, and he's like, "What?" And then the guy's like, looks at him, and he's like, "I want to speak to the general." And my co-worker's just standing there in as much bewilderment as I am. And he's like, "Oh, sorry?" And he's like, "I want to speak to the general." And then I'm like, "Do you mean the manager?" And he's like, "I want to speak to the guy in charge." And I'm like, this guy must have like a complaint or something, because he sounds aggressive. He's got like his shoulders squared. He looks like a real, like, you know, he's big tough guy. And so I turned to my coworker, and I'm like, "Oh, where's the manager? He was here a moment ago." And my coworker just like looks at me with his like eyes, and his concern in his eyes, and he's like, "I don't know." And then my manager opens, he comes back into the shop. I don't know what he was doing. He was doing something with fuel. Anyway, he comes back in, and he's like, "Huh?" And this guy looks at him and is like, "I want to speak to the general." And so I'm like, so I turn back to the guy, and like my friendliest customer service smile, I'm like, "Oh, you're just in luck. The manager just arrived." And so my boss walks over and is like, "Sorry?" And the guy looks at him, and he's like, "You the manager?" And my boss is like, "Yeah." And he looks at him, and he squares his shoulders, and he's like, you know, like full, he's standing there, he's got his like fancy coat on, he's got like shoulders squared, he's glaring daggers at my manager, and he looks at him and he goes, "I want a potato cake." And my manager's like, "Sorry?" And he's like, "I want a potato cake." And he's like, "From the Hells Angels, I want a potato cake." And the moment he starts name dropping, I'm so glad for masks, because I cannot hide my facial expressions, and I'm just sitting there, I'm like sniggering. I'm so glad he didn't hear me. I'm just like giggling to myself. Like, what kind of big tough gang member, like big tough guy, comes in, like, and just, what kind of person decides to have a power trip in a servo? Like at two skinny Indian guys and a teenage girl. Like, yeah, that makes you real brave. I'm sure everyone can tell who the alpha is. Like, I'm sure when he goes back to his totally real gang friends, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I went down to the servo down the road, and like, and I was like, oh, I got the manager out, and I looked him dead in the eyes, and I was like, give me a potato cake." And I threw me money at him. Anyway, so this guy's like, "How much is it?" And like my manager, everyone's quiet, because this guy's gotten more aggressive, and he started swearing more too, like swearing at my manager. And my manager's trying to get, I think he got like 2 potato cakes, and my manager's like getting the potato cakes, putting them in the bag, and this guy's like starts swearing about like how he ain't the manager, and he's like, my boss ain't the manager now, he's the manager, and like starts like threatening him. And my boss just like walks over, and like I'd taken a step back at this point, because I'm like, man, this guy's angry, and I didn't want him to see me laughing, because I had a feeling that would have just made him go off his rocker. And so, and like my poor co-worker's just standing there, and he taps me on the shoulder, and I turn around, and he's got the phone in his hand. It's like, "So they call 000?" And I was like, I've never been in this situation before. And so then my manager goes over, and he puts the potato cakes down, and the guy's like, "How much is it?" And my manager's like, "It's $4, and you got to use appropriate language." And the guy turns around, and there's like 5 other people lined up behind him, and he looks at him like, "There's only 5 people in the shop, you." And then he starts swearing, and like starts using racist slurs. And I was already like giggling at this guy, and it took me so unexpected. I don't know why I didn't expect it, but he just like starts, like, swearing and being racist at my boss. So my boss is just, like, there's some people you can, like, order them out the shop, but there's some people you just have to, like, be as neutral as possible, because if you set them off anymore, they're going to start throwing stuff. And so my boss, he pays for him, he throws his money down the counter, and then he's like, want a receipt? And he's like glaring, he's got his, again, he's got like big tough guy pose, like his shoulders up and squared, making himself look bigger, like, and my boss like hits the thing, gets a receipt, and he grabs it, and he's like, I'm gonna shove this up. And my manager's like, okay. And then the guy starts leaving. And then he sees a guy in the line. He's like, oh, I haven't seen you in forever, mate. And he starts chatting with this random guy in the line. And all the other customers who it's their turn now are like looking nervously over their shoulders and like looking at us. Like they're not saying anything because the guy's still in the shop. But they're like pity in their eyes. Like, oh, I'm sorry, mate. And so this dude's like having this animated conversation with this other guy. And so my manager steps behind me, pulls out the phone, and he starts dialing something. And he's like, hello, we got, yes, this is the servo, terrible Indian accent. Yes, we got the customer being very abusive to the staff. We need to get him out of here. And just calls the cops on him. And the dude eventually left before the police got there, but they came in, they chatted to my manager and stuff. And believe it or not, that's not actually the end of the story. Because it was like 20 minutes before I was due to leave, and this other kid comes in, and he looks about my age or a bit older, and he walks into the food prep, the area, like with the register and the food prep area, and I look over at him, and then he greets my other co-worker, and they start talking, and I figure out pretty quick, oh, he's a new hire. And so I introduced myself. He shook my hand, which was really nice, like, oh, thank you. Not many people, like, I was like, oh, hey, what's your name? And he like puts his hand there, it's like, hello, my name's, and like, yeah, it was really friendly. And so I was like talking to him, like small talk, because I'd never met him before, found out he was like just really new, like he was still doing training. And so I was like, hey, guess what you just missed out on? And I started talking about what, the story about the guy with the coat. And then I was like, oh, and he's got this, and I was describing the dude, and I was like, he's got this coat on, goes down his feet, and the guy points at me suddenly, he's like, was it green? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, this guy, I was sitting in my car, and this guy comes up to me, he's like, oi, you got the time? And so the dude gives him the time, and he's like, oh, now you better shut your mouth, I'm the head of Hell's Angels. And then just walks away. And like, but yeah, so that's what happened today.